Welcome to the video that is going to get you a grade 9 in GCSE Biology, Paper 2. We're going to be going through some topics that are really likely to come up based upon examiners' reports and over the past papers. We're going to be separating it into things that are for both separate science and combined science and a couple of things that are just for separate science. I'm going to go through some of the most common mistakes that students will make in this paper to make sure that you do not make those mistakes, as well as some last minute revision tips that you can be implementing tonight and the morning before the exam. So let's get straight into things. Of course, I have been through some of the past papers and the examiners' reports and have got a bit of a list of the things that are either due for a test or are always tested or are really quite likely to come up based on what examiners have written in examiners' reports. So the main topics that are going to be coming up in this paper, definitely, it's homeostasis and response, it's inheritance, variation and evolution, it's ecology, and for separate science you've also got the brain, the eye, biotechnology and plant hormones as well. So starting on homeostasis and response, this is generally a topic area that is answered really quite well by students, but I know I didn't find it that easy. But regardless, the likely topics that are going to come up based upon what has kind of been coming up recently, first of all, negative feedback loops have been under-tested, and I think they are very important within this topic. So you can expect questions on negative feedback loops. Think about adrenaline or thyroxine for this. As well as that, the control of blood glucose, insulin versus glucagon, and the way in which that process actually works. With all of these things, if you're sat there thinking, oh, I don't really know, and I'm talking about these processes, these things like negative feedback loops, or like the control of blood glucose, I just want you to go and find animated videos that just explain things. They don't have to be directly targeted to GCSE, better if they are because they might start mentioning chemicals and hormones that you don't need to know about. But there are so many. I like the Amoeba Sisters for this. I thought those animations were really, really good. So those are going to be your best friend when it comes to biology. For separate science only, the brain and the eye, the structure and functions, and also the iris reflex. I don't think that has really been tested at all. So I would look out for questions on that and make sure that you can label the different parts of the brain and label the different parts of the eye as well, because they always like throwing those questions in there that, you know, they're things that you think you know because you see it on the textbook, but you don't actually take the time to memorize. And then when it comes to the exam, you actually can't memorize, you can't actually label the parts of the brain. So do make sure you are going to be able to do that. Now, in terms of homeostasis and response, some of the most common mistakes that come up are firstly mixing up hormones and nerve responses. So not understanding the differences. So for example, the responses that are generated by hormones, they're going to be slower, they're going to be longer lasting than responses that are caused by your nervous system. But that is something that can be tested. There's a lot of comparison points that can be made, and it hasn't really been tested all that much, but when it is, then students tend to get it wrong, and that is something that I think you can fix really easily in an evening. And also not including evaluation and judgment in questions, particularly when they ask you about fertility treatments and reproductive hormones, you need like evaluation and judgment. So do be thinking about the command words, but we'll come back to command words slightly later on in the video. The next topic that's going to come up, inheritance, variation and evolution. This is quite a big topic, but thinking about it, genetic diagrams, Punnett squares, probability, looking at genotypes versus phenotypes, that comes up literally every year. Just know your stuff on that. As well as that, meiosis versus mitosis. I know people don't like to revise that. I hated revising that, but it forms the basis. If not for a longer answer question, it can form the basis for underlying logic behind 2 markers, or you might have to label some stuff on diagrams. Just make sure you know those processes inside out. And for higher, knowing DNA structure and protein synthesis. I remember protein synthesis was like the thing that I was looking at morning of the exam because I just could not get it into my head no matter what I was doing. And there was a question on it. So good job I did look over it on the morning of that exam. So again, if there are areas that you're thinking, I really do not know this and I'm not going to know this, write it down on a little cheat sheet and make sure you look over that cheat sheet before you go into the exam. Then it'll be in your short-term memory, even if it's not in your long-term memory, and you'll still do really well. Also on this, knowing antibiotic resistance, knowing that process off by heart, that is really likely to come up. It's been under-tested. When it is tested, examiners say students perform poorly. That makes it very likely to come up. And the most common mistakes are using the word gene when you mean allele. That is really common. Do not be making that mistake. There is a difference. And also not explaining how antibiotic resistance spreads in questions about antibiotic resistance. So just explaining sort of what it is rather than looking at the whole causal mechanism. Again, watching those videos can be really, really useful for getting this into your brain. Ecology. Now, I think the most common thing that's going to come up is the fieldwork practical, looking at quadrats, transects, and the method for doing that, including why you repeat the process. I think that hasn't really come up, and that is a big component of this topic area. So have a look at that fieldwork methodology, and at the same time, make sure you know your abiotic, biotic factors. They always come up as 1 or 2 markers, and thinking about waste management. I think this is just separate, but it might be combined. But waste management in terms of land, water, air pollution, understanding those processes, being able to draw diagrams, being able to consider and create evaluation arguments is going to be really quite important. Now, those are sort of the most substantial topic areas and some of the biggest things that are likely to come up. I think that generally the most frequent things that examiners were saying in their examiners' reports were firstly that students were using really vague language. So they said like it travels or it affects something. No, if you're saying something travels, don't say it travels, say exactly what. So for example, the hormone, how it travels as well. So is it in the bloodstream? If it's a hormone, yes. Is it some sort of nervous response? Does it go through the nervous system? You always have to be saying what is travelling, how it is travelling, where it is coming from and where it is going to, and that's going to really help you. But just generally in terms of vagueness of language, never be vague, never use it to state what you mean. Don't say like something is, doing something. It is doing this vague thing. No, you have to be uber specific about what the exact process is and what the exact steps of that process are. Then the second thing is not having a final judgment in evaluate questions. So that is a really crucial command word in GCSE biology. You have evaluate questions where you need to be presenting, okay, on one hand, on the other hand, or describing a process. But the fact that the command word is evaluate means you have to provide a conclusion. If you do not provide a conclusion, the maximum number of marks that you can get in that 6-mark question is going to be 4. Even if you have the most incredible, developed, structured answer, if you don't have a final conclusion with a judgment, 4 marks out of 6. Putting in your little judgment, putting in your thing, even if your analysis isn't amazing, you'll probably still get 5 out of 6. So make sure you're putting that in there. And finally, diagrams and descriptions. So if you are drawing your own diagram, you've got to be very confident that you are labelling it correctly, because you will get docked marks for not labelling it correctly. You won't be like at the same level, because a lot of students think, oh, well, if I do a diagram that's slightly incorrect, it's fine because my writing will make up for it and I won't actually lose marks. You will lose marks if you don't label it correctly. So make sure you are doing that. On this, do make sure you are aware of the required practicals, particularly, as I say, that field investigation for ecology, which involves your transects or your quadrats, whatever you had been using, but also the reaction time experiment, and making sure that you know in association with that, obviously, the apparatus, the control variables, independent, dependent variables, and explain the experiment, but also being able to, particularly for this reaction time thing, think about things that are going to delay, inhibit reaction time. That's just the most fundamental, like alcohol, drugs. Those sorts of things are always answers to those questions, but making sure that you know the required practicals, you know all of the variables, you could explain them, and you could answer longer form questions evaluating those practicals as well. And that was your last minute night before guide to studying for biology GCSE paper 2 tomorrow. Good luck. I hope it goes amazing. As ever, ask any questions that you like in the comments and I'll do my best to respond.